Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon to all the participants from Australia. Good morning to participants from Asia, and good day to participants from all parts of the world. Glad you all can join us for today's symposium on international partnerships and heritage practice, and is presented to you by AusHeritage. To start with, let me acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and community. I pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders, past and present, of the lands we meet on today, and acknowledge any First Nations people from Australia and around the world who are joining us today. AusHeritage was established by the Australian government in 1995 as part of an industry development initiative and has been an independent organization for over 25 years. Our membership interconnects a diverse and unique group of specialists with rich Australian and international expertise in movable and immovable cultural heritage that includes buildings, places, intangible heritage, and collections in galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. As Australia's International Cultural Heritage Network, we have been collaborating on cultural heritage projects and capacity building in priority fields such as museum management and collection care, historic buildings conservation, World Heritage community engagement strategies, site interpretation, and disaster risk reduction, particularly in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific. While our focus is international, the expertise of AusHeritage members is founded on extensive Australian experience that is recognized globally. We work collaboratively with partners in the region since our inception and have several memorandums of understandings, including with the Indian National Trust for Art and Culture and Rajasthan's PD Corps in India, Penang Heritage Trust, Think City, and Georgetown World Heritage Incorporated in Malaysia, Bureau of Cultural Heritage, and China University of Technology in Taiwan. We also, for nearly a decade, worked closely with the ASEAN Committee on Cultural Information. Through over 30 missions to the region and several strategic projects, we have worked and continue to work closely with the partners, sharing and learning in the process. We are thankful to the Australian government for the continuing support to effectively implement our initiatives, especially on the ground. I really want to thank the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade posts in various parts where we have implemented projects, and Austrade offices. Thank you so much, Penny and Tim and the University of Melbourne team for your implementation support, and Alex for curating this fantastic program. So what I'll do now is let me introduce the symposium moderator, Alex Marsden, and pass it on to her. I think by now everyone is probably familiar with Alex Marsden. She is a deputy chair of AusHeritage and runs her own company, Alex Marsden Cultural Services, drawing on a diverse background in public policy, strategic design, advocacy, and cultural heritage management. Trained as a historian, she has worked in museums, the non-government sector, state and national heritage agencies, and key national public policy departments. She was also instrumental in establishing AusHeritage over 20 years back. Alex will now outline the objectives of the symposium and the structure and the timings of the two sessions. She'll briefly introduce each speaker and manage the question and answer at the end of each session. Over to you, Alex.
Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to moderate this symposium, and I'm delighted to know that over 120 of you have chosen to join us today. Even if I can't see you, it's great to know that colleagues from around Australia and the world are here. Please do use the chat function to comment and share while keeping respectful, of course. And if you want to put a question to the speakers in the two Q&A discussions, please put them in the Q&A box, not the chat, and that way I can find them more easily. The objective today is to explore some of the issues relating to a contemporary understanding of international partnerships and heritage practice, drawing on Australian and international experts and practitioners. This is a very broad topic and one dear to AusHeritage's heart. What do we mean by partnerships, and with whom? Are they changing, or should they change, and why? What are the pressures driving change? Are all successful international partnerships, even commercial or aid-funded projects, eventually about the personal, about relationships, attitudes, assumptions, and the building of trust? And what do all these pressures and maturing perceptions of the world, its risks and opportunities, mean for heritage practitioners and their approach to international collaboration? To explore and discuss these and more complex questions, I'm very pleased to be joined by 7 wonderful speakers. The symposium has 2 sessions. The first is focused on changing environments, and the 4 keynotes will both set the scene and analyse what's going on in various, quite different scenarios. The session will conclude with a 15-minute Q&A discussion opportunity with all 4 speakers. Session 2 has a panel of 3 speakers who are looking at the implications for heritage practice, drawing on past experience and current challenges. This session also includes a Q&A discussion and some significant time for that. We'll keep to that. We have some absolute stars in the heritage firmament who have agreed to speak today, and I'm very grateful for that. I'll give a short bio as I introduce each keynote speaker in the first session, and we'll introduce the 3 panelists all together for the second session. I'll also be a strict timekeeper as we have much to focus on, and I do intend to leave time for the 2 Q&A discussions. So without further ado, let's kick off session 1 with the theme of changing environments. And I've got a slight change to the program. We're going to start with Julian Bickersteth. Julian Bickersteth is the current president of the International Institute for Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works, as well as founder and CEO of ICS, International Conservation Services Proprietary Limited. Educated at Oxford University and trained as a conservator, Julian came to Australia in the early 1980s to work at the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney. Julian has worked across the cultural heritage sector, including as Director of the National Trust New South Wales for 10 years and a board member of AusHeritage for 6 years. He's currently chair of the David Roche Foundation in Adelaide and patron of Arts National. He's passionate about the value of international collaborations, especially in mitigating the impact of climate change on cultural heritage. Welcome, Julian.
Alex, thank you, and thank you more broadly for the opportunity to be able to speak to an issue that is very important to me as a cultural heritage conservator: partnerships and collaboration. In doing so, I also want to tie collaboration to the issue of how the cultural heritage profession collaboratively responds sustainably to climate change. We're hearing a lot about climate change this week in Australia, with record temperatures in New South Wales and Queensland, Australia's hottest winter day, cyclonic winds and rainstorms that won't go away in Tasmania. For you Australians, did you see, by the way, it felt like minus 22 Celsius at the top of Mount Wellington last weekend? We know the impact this is having on the cultural heritage we care for, whether through direct sudden loss in floods or bushfires or erosion of archaeological sites, or slow loss through mold growth or changing insect infestation patterns, or indirect loss through loss of community and intangible values. We know that as a profession, we're working hard to prepare and plan for such events and get better at it all the time and respond quickly when they occur to mitigate their impact on the cultural heritage we care for. But this immediate effect of the impact of climate change has caused us, in my view, to sideline somewhat the broader issue of the sustainability of our life here on planet Earth. This is where the UNESCO SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are so useful, despite the fact that none of them expressly include heritage in their core descriptors. I like to loop back to sustainable development as first defined in the World Commission on Environment and Development's 1987 Brundtland Report, which defined, I quote, "our common future as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs." I'm sure we've all heard that many times before. I find the Earth Overshoot Day a salutary reminder of quite how far off we are. Earth Overshoot Day, for those who are not aware of it, is computed by dividing the planet's biocapacity, namely the amount of ecological resources Earth is able to regenerate that year, by humanity's ecological footprint, namely humanity's demand for that year, and then dividing by 365. In 1971, Earth Overshoot Day was December the 25th, i.e. we overshot by 6 days. Last year, it was August the 1st. We overshot by 152 days. Now, I should just catch that in the fact that that date has not moved dramatically in about the last 4 or 5 years, and in fact reversed over COVID in 2020. But it does show you how behind all of this modern discussion of climate change, the actual sustainability of our life here is something we've got to really work on. So, having got that off my back, let me talk about what we can do about it, initially through the lens of international partnerships in heritage practice, and in this case, collaboration with China. I'm just going to share screen here, if you'll bear with me. Australia has a long history of working with heritage professionals in China. The ICOMOS China Principles that Sharon Sullivan largely wrote in collaboration with the Getty in 2000 being a prime example. My introduction to China was in 2008, when I was part of an AusHeritage delegation to meet with ICOMOS China. And here's this happy band of travellers at the concluding photograph. It was a memorable trip, not least due to my friend and colleague Bruce Petman, who you'll hear from later. There he is, sort of mid-range on the right of my screen, being mistaken for Father Christmas in the great forecourt in the Forbidden City, and drawing a very large crowd of admirers. I should also, while I'm looking at that photograph, note that between me and Bruce is Andrew Durham, former director of Art Lab, a wonderful friend, secretary and supporter of Art Lab, who so sadly passed away last year. And in fact, I see also Roger Beeston to Bruce's left, who was a key part of that delegation, and I think joins us today. On that trip, I was introduced to the approach that Chinese conservators from the Palace Museum, the body that administers the Forbidden City, were taking in restoring the sublimely beautiful Zhuangjiangzai Pavilion, otherwise known as the Studio of Exhaustion from Diligent Service. Here it is within the walls of the Forbidden City. They were working with local craftspeople who still maintained in their community the traditions that had been used at the time of the building's creation in 1775. They were using, for instance, embroidery artisans from Zhuzhou to create the extraordinary double-sided silk embroidery in the internal partition windows. Just going back one stage, this wonderful work actually was heavily supported by the World Monuments Fund. I think they put $3 million into it. But the work was undertaken by the conservators from the Palace Museum, and it is, for those of you who get the chance to go and see it, the most exquisite building all round. That trip set me up for further interaction with China. In 2014, the ISC, the body of which I'm just going to stop sharing. In 2014, the body of which I'm currently president, met in Hong Kong and signed an agreement with Dr. Shan Jiang, the director of the Palace Museum, to collaborate on the establishment of an international training centre for conservators at the Palace Museum. Interestingly, Dr. Shan gave the conference keynote address in Hong Kong at our conference in 2014, where he talked at length about the value of local communities working with professional conservators to provide sustainable solutions to cultural heritage conservation. Fast forward, if I could, to a series of slides I just want to talk to about a site in Sudan, where this process of collaboration with local communities is a critical piece, because in 4 years ago at our IAC Congress in Edinburgh, we heard about the conservation of this extraordinary site. Dan Gale, the site, is the site of a first-century temple and cemetery. Archaeological excavation and conservation were initiated in 2000 by the National Corporation for Antiquities and Museums in the Sudan, in cooperation with the British Museum. The long-term goals of the project are to ensure the protection and accessibility of the site, its structures, and its associated collections in a sustainable manner. In Dungale, these challenges are complicated by a number of extremes. Poor materials, inherent weakness in those building materials, which are unfired mud brick, extreme environments, with the rainy season brief and violent and summer temperatures rocketing between 50 degrees Celsius, dropping to 0 at night, remoteness with a paved road only recently reaching the site, and as we so well and sadly know, extensive political turmoil in Sudan. The relationship with the community is critical for the survival of Dangale. The archaeological area is located directly within the village, as you saw, and people cross the site every day, attending to business, visiting relatives, and going to school. As a consequence, the site is still perceived as a common space belonging to the community, rather than as an external space owned by the government or a foreign mission. Employing and training members of the local community has been a crucial element in creating a healthy and sustainable relationship with the village. Work on site has been a stable source of income for the past 20 years, supporting the local economy so that almost everyone in the village has worked on the site. This personal involvement has helped gain the support of the community for caring and conserving the site and seeing it as an integral part of the village's cultural, economic, and social life. Fast forward then to 2 weeks ago, where I was back in Beijing once again to extend the life of the agreement that IIC has with the Palace Museum. This relationship is very much a collaborative one. The museum provides the funding and the resources, and IIC provides the international lecturers from our fellows around the world. The latest course was on metals, with the lecturing team headed by our own Dr. Ian MacLeod from WA. There he is, 2 behind me, an international expert in maritime archaeology and more broadly in metals conservation. Dr. Shan's successor as director at the Palace Museum is Dr. Wang Zudong, who's standing to my right. And we've developed a close relationship that IIC looks forward to continuing to build on and deepen in the years to come. For his commitment to the relationship, China understands, for years to come. China understands the value of local skills being used to build community connection and ownership with cultural heritage conservation. Excuse me, just one moment. Since 2015, this relationship in the establishment of IIC and the International Training Centre has seen 117 participants from 37 countries in Asia, Africa, Europe, America, and Oceania benefiting from the training workshops covering topics such as preventive conservation, non-destructive analysis, textiles, paper and photography, and scientific approaches to ceramics and glass. What its idea is to develop the professional capacity and standards for conservation professionals, particularly from developing countries and the Asia-Pacific region. The way it works is that we advertise around the world. we select 12 international students, and the Palace Museum selects 12 Chinese students, and we meet for between 2 and 3 weeks in the Palace Museum and the Conservation Hospital, as it is called, which services the Palace Museum and their astonishing collections. From the outset, the operational cost of the ITCC has been borne by the Palace Museum, and I do put on record their extraordinary generosity that has enabled this training centre to flourish. Thank you, but one moment. I will stop share just to complete what I'm talking about. There are many examples I could cite of the success of local community involvement in creating sustainable outcomes for the conservation of cultural heritage around the world. Our next IC Congress is in Lima in Peru in 2 weeks' time, and it has a number of papers on the joint issue of collaboration and sustainability. I spotted at least the following flicking through the programme yesterday. Here's one: fostering inclusive management and community participation, lessons from the field in Spain. Another one: sustainable cultural preservation in Central Asia, involving local communities as caretakers of archaeological sites. And a third one: sustainable and collaborative solutions for the long-term care of heritage earthen sites in seismic areas in Peru. It promises to be a significant conference on a number of fronts. I do encourage all of you, please join IIC in the next fortnight if you can, and then you get free access to the full range of papers online. Plus, we're running a series of virtual hubs that have been set up around the world. The purpose of those is that you can sit in the comfort of your own home and still participate in an active way in Q&A sessions in groups in these virtual hubs. So, in summary, I conclude by putting to you that a reminder as we seek to respond to the impact of climate change on the preservation of cultural heritage, that the joint tenets of sustainable solution undertaken collaboratively, whether that collaboration is with international partners or with local communities, is going to be a critical factor in the success of our response. Thank you.
Thanks, Julian. Thanks very much. I look forward to a lot of the questions, and I have some of my own as well. We're now going to move on to our second speaker, Susan McDonald, and hopefully our first keynote speaker will be able to get online and when she's able to join us. But Susan McDonald joined the Getty Conservation Institute in 2008 as head of buildings and sites, where she oversees over 20 projects that aim to advance conservation practice internationally, involving research, field projects, training and dissemination. Susan has a BSc Architecture and a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Sydney and a Master's in Conservation Studies from the University of York, ICROM, and is a certified practicing planner. Susan has worked as a conservation architect in private practice in Australia and in England. She's also worked in the public sector, where she was involved in a wide range of conservation issues at the strategic and bottom-up level, involving urban planning, development, economics, policy, technical matters, and World Heritage issues. Susan has an interest in 20th century heritage and is a member of the Docomomo International Specialist Technical Committee and co-president of the ICOMOS 20th Century Committee. Welcome, Susan.
Hello. Okay, I'm going to try and share my screen. Hello, everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to be joining you all today. I thought I would share a little bit about the partnerships for our work that we do at the Getty Conservation Institute and some experiences gleaned from the field that reflect that particular view and the issues and the changes that we're facing. But before I start, just a little bit about the Getty. For those of you that don't know it, we are a Los Angeles-based non-profit, which is dedicated to advancing knowledge and conservation of the world's cultural heritage. And as well as 2 museums, we actually have a research institute, a foundation, and a conservation institute known as the GCI, where I work. Our mission, as you heard, is to advance conservation practice internationally. And that sort of mission means that partnerships have to be at the core of and absolutely fundamental to our work. We don't actually own or steward any of the heritage places where we work, nor do we have any authority over them. So the quality and the impact of our work is therefore absolutely solely reliant on our relationships and the strength of our partnerships. And this is based on a shared vision and ambitions for the work that we do together. So we have a number of different modalities of work. We work on research. We have practical field projects. We create and disseminate information. And we also do capacity building, including training. And we also try to play a role in contributing to and supporting communities of conservation practice. And sometimes these projects involve one of these modalities, but more often than not, they're actually a combination of these different activities. And this was the case in our work in Bagan in Myanmar, which is shown here in the picture here. So these are some of our current projects that we're doing in my department at the moment. I'm showing you the different modalities and in different parts of the work, which spans many parts of the world. The work that we're doing in Peru, for example, includes all of those modalities. We're working with the Department of Patrimony there and local government to identify sustainable methods for improving the seismic resistivity of earthen heritage, which is really important there. Implementing these techniques on a series of field projects, integrating it into the building codes there, and undertaking training for architects and engineers. The partnership that we have with the Abu Dhabi Department of Heritage and Tourism is a single modality project where we're delivering training with them for participants from North Africa, the Middle East, South Asia on conserving earthen heritage. So we think about partnerships as being distinct from collaborations or consultancies or grants. And this is something that we've become a lot more precise about over the last 10 years in response to our experiences, formal partnership evaluations that we do, shifts in conservation and governance landscapes, and societal shifts. And it recognizes the need that we find to have really clear and aligned expectations for our work. Each partnership is, of course, unique and context-driven, and it builds on our past experiences. Our partnerships are formal arrangements between one or more organisations where the terms of the work and the respective roles are pretty clearly laid out. And we also are involved in collaborations which tend to be less formal and are often used for short-term activities or work. So this is some examples of the types of partners we have. Our partners are principally government heritage organisations. Those that are responsible for the sites we work on. We don't have an official role anywhere. It's not our heritage. Our only influence is the ability to support our partner to achieve their conservation goals. We're there at their invitation, and we inevitably know less about the place than our partners or their stakeholders. So on the left here, we have some examples of some of the current government partners we have at the moment. We also sometimes partner or collaborate with intergovernment organisations such as UNESCO or ICROM for training, and other NGOs such as WMF, SEAO SPAFA, Docomomo, ICOMOS, and so on. Including some common AusHeritage partners you'll see on our NGO lists. And as I said, there are also informal collaborations, particularly with local communities, which are absolutely vital, as Julian just said, but are usually managed in collaboration with our on-the-ground partners. Over the years, a lot of the research that we do with universities, we've shifted from partnerships to consultancies, and that really reflects the difference in the aims for our work sometimes, where we will be seeking really specific practical outcomes for the research, while a university may have similar but slightly different aims. So I thought I'd share some of the current principles that we try to live by for our partnerships that have evolved in response to contemporary practice and the current climate. We've heard about this word sustainable, but our work really tries to aim for sustainable outcomes based on sustainable approaches, which often relies on sustained partnerships over the long term, a lot of sustaining. And because our work is rarely single project-based. Really, it's about advancing practice in the areas that we're working. A sign of our success is when our partner is able to sustain the work by themselves, and that can sometimes take quite a long time. Our work in China that Julian mentioned has spanned 30 continuous years. Our work in Egypt has had a similar but much more disrupted time frame. And this is because respect and trust is really key, and it can take quite a long time to grow. And as I mentioned before, success is really dependent on having a very strong shared vision and shared values for the work. Of course, adopting an ethical approach to conservation, but also operationally, is key. We all work internationally. Corruption does arise. It's not unknown, but it's not something that is knowingly tolerated. I think one recent thing that we're paying more attention to as conservation practice generally and the Getty institutionally brings more commitment to diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion. So too are we working to secure more equitable approaches to our partnerships. Partnerships are not always equal, and that is okay. Sometimes we find we need to bring more at the beginning of a partnership while our partner ramps up resources, skills, and support. But this often changes over time and as self-sufficiency and independence grows. So we reassess and reimagine our partnerships periodically, but partnerships should always be equitable. It's also really important to be sensitive to any power imbalances and understand how this can affect the work. Sort of an obvious one is that our work, we try and make sure it's fit for purpose. That is, that it's matched to local capacity. So we try and design approaches that can be sustained, that our partner can sustain the resources such as equipment and skills after we leave. Most of our partners want really fancy documentation and techniques and equipment, but often they don't have the IT infrastructure to support and sustain that data. Like just sort of an example of that. It sounds pretty logical, but I'm surprised how often some foreign missions are planned by foreign teams without the local partner. Working with the partner's budget and work cycles is also important. We often have that challenge of wanting to get money out the door, but that can not always be a useful thing for our partners. We also try and make sure we have very clear roles and responsibilities in place for the work together, which sometimes actually isn't that easy to get that out on the table. Obviously, understanding and observing cultural approaches and norms is absolutely crucial, but also establishing equitable communication approaches is really important, including language. We try and work in the local language as far as possible. Our project in Peru is undertaken entirely in Spanish. A project we were doing in Morocco, we established French as our common language, but when we had really important meetings, we had a translator who could also work in Berber and Arabic as well. A lot of our training on mosaics conservation in North Africa was delivered in French, but the documents have all been provided in Arabic. So I think one thing that we've learned over a long, it's been obvious from the start, but growing more and more, is that cultural and language translation, it's a big investment, but without it, you just miss so much. The work's limited to much fewer people. It has lesser impact. So it's something that we're increasingly honouring as a principle and trying to ensure in all of our work. Another one is that using local or regional people whenever possible as our consultants on our projects helps to ground the work culturally, but also helps build the capacity of other professionals in the region who our partners can continue to work with in the longer term when we may not still be there. I think international work is, of course, subject to a lot of political challenges, things over which we have no control. So we try as far as possible to expect and anticipate change. We've had wars, political unrest, coups, sanctions, safety and security concerns are all reasons where we've had to shift or suspend or halt projects and dissolve partnerships over the years. But of course, it's this uncertainty often which creates the need for external support for conservation in some countries. And so going into the work with a good understanding of the risks, the economic risks, the reputational risks, safety and security is very much part of the work. And we use an international risk assessment organization who does a really deep dive for us on the places that we work and the partners that we're going to work with, and we fairly regularly reassess those risks. I thought I'd just finish with a few final observations and reflections that I've noticed over the last few years. And the first one of those is that as the heritage system at the World Heritage level becomes ever more politicized, heritage conservation is also increasingly being used as a tool in soft power. And as heritage is also increasingly globalized, everyone's very keen to engage in the very exciting opportunities to work internationally. And I think many of you will have witnessed the post-World Heritage inscription frenzy that happens in some parts of the world, or as countries open up from periods of oppression, when heritage places can actually become a little bit of an international playpen. And this has both benefits, but it also has disbenefits. I think there are many examples of fantastic, well-meaning and successful projects. Equally, we see some that are highly politicized or exert regional power and development interests, and we observed that in Myanmar really sadly. Others are less sinister, but they can reflect personal interests and ambitions of those involved rather than the strategic needs of the heritage place. I think the problem for a lot of the heritage authorities, who in my experience are peopled by really wonderful, passionate, dedicated and resilient professionals, is that they can be under a lot of pressure to accept whatever is offered by higher government. They may well know things aren't a good project or a partnership, but they lack the power or authority to refuse, or the capacity to negotiate for better targeted or needs-based projects. Or they can be nervous to communicate what they really need in fear that the offer might go away. And so sometimes it's taken us a long while to kind of get to the bottom of that and find out what might really be necessary and useful. I think also I have witnessed some really shocking behavior by foreign missions who will not share what they're doing or take any critique or direction, which is just terrible to watch. Another principle that I've added recently is to build on what is already in place rather than reinventing the wheel based on what people do at home. Places with a history of foreign missions are faced with a barrage of different approaches and systems and processes, and they can often be left a little bit baffled about which ones they should be enacting. When we started work in Bagan, they specifically asked us for training as an example. We said, what do you need? They said, everything, whatever you want to give us. And we went back and we had a look at an inventory of all the training they'd received over a sort of 8-year period. And we found there was a huge amount of training that had been delivered by many, many different organizations, all independent of each other, uncoordinated, without reference to what went on before. And so then we kind of ran some workshops with them to really pin down where the gaps were and how could we reinforce what had already been delivered there, and in order to develop a 10-year training strategy that we hoped to deliver, but were obviously not able to. I think another important thing is to give more than you get back. The benefits need to flow to the place and the stewards rather than the foreign partner. The other thing I've noticed is that some countries' partnership models are based on colonial concepts that hark back to the good old days of archaeological explorations that were undertaken by university or foreign missions, and where conservation was a permit condition. And there are a number of problems of this, which I don't have time to talk about. But I think the point is that challenging some of those traditional partnership models can be really difficult, but we need to break from some of these colonial structures, especially in order to deal with some of the emerging issues for heritage that rely on coordinated, multi-partner and sustained, strategic and sustained efforts. So I just want to finish by saying that international work, as I'm sure many of you know, can reap such great rewards for the places that receive support and for those involved, but really relies on this sound, mutually respectful partnerships. And it's such a great privilege to engage in such work. I have been so very humbled and enriched by the opportunities that I've had in service to our partners. I'm so grateful for the learning that we've done together and for our partners' generosity and the education that they've provided me. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan, and particularly a lovely range of honest and perceptive insights and useful insights for us all. And particularly thank you for staying up so late in Los Angeles, where you're speaking from now in very hot weather. Thank you. Next speakers, we're circling back to speaker number 1, which I'm delighted, really looking forward to Fiona Hoggart's presentation. Fiona is the head of the newly established ASEAN Australia Centre at Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. This was announced by the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese in March 2024 and opened in July. The Centre's mission is to connect Australia and Southeast Asia for a peaceful, prosperous and inclusive region. Fiona has extensive experience in Southeast Asian foreign policy and diplomacy, having served in Indonesia multiple times. Prior to her role as head of the centre, Fiona was the Australian Consulate General in Surabaya, and she's passionate about deepening Southeast Asian literacy in Australia. Welcome, Fiona.
Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you for the kind introduction, and hello, everyone. I'm joining you from Canberra today, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of this region, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, and I pay my respect to their elders past and present. And can I also recognise the traditional owners of the lands where you're all dialing in from, and any First Nations peoples present today. To Vinod and Alex and the team at AusHeritage, can I thank you for inviting me to speak today, and can I just recognise all the distinguished speakers that we've heard already today. It's been a fascinating discussion and presentations, and for the rest of the afternoon, it's a privilege to be joining this panel. So the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, we're not strangers to AusHeritage. We've got a very long-standing relationship. Vinod and I worked together many years ago in Indonesia, almost 20 years ago, I think. So one of the reasons that our organizations work so well together is because we have a shared interest in developing capability. Some of the projects that we've worked on in the past include DFAT supporting AusHeritage to build capacity in museum management in Southeast Asia. And it's wonderful to maintain that connection and continue working together. Today's focus on relationships and partnerships is an excellent place for me to start, as they have been and continue to be pivotal to my role in DFAT. I came back to Canberra in the thick of winter, quite an interesting time to move home, especially as my heating broke soon after arriving, after 3 years living in Indonesia's second largest city, Surabaya, as the Australian Consul General. In my current role, I'm heading up the newly established ASEAN Australia Centre, and for those of you who may not be familiar with the term ASEAN, it stands for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which comprises 10 of Australia's closest neighbours in Southeast Asia, and potentially an 11th member, Timor-Leste, which is going through the process of accession to ASEAN. Over the course of 20 years working for DFAT, I've been very fortunate to have had multiple postings in Indonesia as well as Solomon Islands. And in my role, both overseas and also in Australia, we spend a lot of time engaging with and nurturing relationships with diaspora communities. They play a critical role in the connection Australia has with other countries around the world. And as a nation that values diversity, I see Australia's role as supporting the preservation of cultural practice and knowledge. So when the purpose of your job is to build and strengthen relationships, it's critical to be incredibly passionate about partnerships. They play a very significant role in the new ASEAN Australia Centre, and I'm very keen to share more details about it today with all of you. Before I do, though, I think it's useful to consider our current economic and cultural landscape. From a heritage perspective, I'm fascinated by the change that happens with time, particularly how we keep up with and take advantage of new opportunities. Having spent a significant proportion of my career working in Southeast Asia, I've seen that change firsthand, both on the ground and here in Australia. Early in my career, the number of individuals with expertise in the Southeast Asian region or with fluency in its languages and culture was relatively modest, although very high profile. and internationally recognised. But that's changed because our country has changed. Some 1 million Australians declared a Southeast Asian ancestry in the last Australian census. So suddenly we have this vast talent pool that we didn't really have 3 decades ago. And I include in that, of course, Australia's Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Penny Wong, who speaks very good Bahasa Melayu. Minister Wong spoke at the Australian National University Centre for Asian Australian Leadership just 2 weeks ago, where she placed a heavy emphasis on the government's focus on partnerships and interconnectedness. She was very clear that we need to invest in deep and direct relationships in our region and beyond. Australia's multiculturalism gives us an enormous advantage. Australians originate from more than 300 ancestries, and our diversity means we're very well placed to find common ground with people from all over the world. But there are also challenges. The number of university students studying an Asian language fell 30% in Australia in the decade to 2022. I've been watching the decline in Indonesian language study for some time, and as someone who studied Indonesian at Monash University 30 years ago, it's really very disappointing that there are now fewer people studying Indonesian in Australia than there were 50 years ago, despite our population today having doubled. In Australian high schools, twice as many students study German in Year 12 as Indonesian. What we're choosing to study doesn't necessarily support the immense opportunities our closest neighbours offer. But the good news is that Australia recognises the urgency and opportunity Southeast Asia presents. And the Prime Minister appointed Nicholas Moore, AO, as a special envoy for Southeast Asia and launched Invested, Australia's economic strategy for Southeast Asia in 2040, last September in Jakarta. The Moore report recommended the government act in 4 areas to deepen two-way trade and investment with the region and position Australia to maximise the potential of our proximity to Southeast Asia. There's actually a chapter in the Moore report that focuses on and identifies as a priority sector the creative industries. So we're very pleased that the ASEAN Australia Centre will be focusing on building the creative industries and support for the creative industries. We're keenly focused on nurturing people-to-people links and, importantly, enhancing Southeast Asian literacy in Australia. Our literacy focus is one of 4 strategic pillars, and the other 3 are strengthening business, education, and cultural connections between Australia and Southeast Asia. 2 months in, as you can imagine, there's a lot to be done in setting up this new centre. We're establishing an advisory board with people with a wide variety of expertise and backgrounds, and they'll be the ones that will be really leading some of those partnerships that we're aiming to develop. We're also going to be opening our first grants round next month. We'll be inviting applicants to apply for grants valued between 50 and 200,000 Australian dollars to carry out work that strengthens business, education, cultural and community connections between Australia and Southeast Asia. We have 3 priority areas for this financial year's grants. They're creative industry exchanges, cultural initiatives, and academic research. So it's a very exciting time for us as we begin rolling out funding to support enhanced connection, enhanced partnerships between Australia and our ASEAN partners. And for those of you who are interested, or if you know of organisations who may be interested, more information will be available at grantsconnect.gov.au soon, and that will have all the detail about the grants available and how to apply. So in conclusion, I would just like to say that we have an incredibly full agenda with a long list of deliverables, but I'm so pleased to have this opportunity to speak with you today about the new centre. Our success relies on people knowing we exist, as well as on the strong partnerships that we're hoping that we will build with people who share our interest in further connecting Australia and Southeast Asia. Please reach out to me if you'd like to know more. And again, thank you, Vinod, Alex, and everyone at AusHeritage and the University of Melbourne for hosting today's symposium. Enjoy the rest of the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiona. We appreciate you taking time out of your incredibly busy schedule, as you've just taken this on board just a couple of months ago. So we really do appreciate that. Our fourth speaker is William Kilbride, and he's speaking to us from Glasgow. Well, actually, he's pre-recorded to make sure he was available. So we do have William Kilbride. He's with us, but we're going to have his pre-recorded to make sure that it's happening all right. And it's pretty early in the morning in Glasgow. So I'll give William Kilbride's bio. So William is Executive Director of the Digital Preservation Coalition, a sector-making charity that provides community, advocacy, workforce development, good practice, and good governance in digital preservation. William started his career as an archaeologist in the 1990s, with an unusual mix of qualifications in computing and archaeology, just at the point when the discipline's enthusiasm for new technology outstripped its capacity to manage the resulting data. He's been working in a variety of digital preservation roles for 25 years, including as Assistant Director of the Archaeology Data Service and Research Manager at Glasgow Museums. In 2020, he was jointly named Information Manager of the Year by the Chartered Institute of Library and Information Professionals, and in 2022 made Honorary Professor in the College of Arts at the University of Glasgow. So welcome, William.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is William Kilbride, and I am the Director of the Digital Preservation Coalition. It's my pleasure to speak to you today. Normally, my topic would be the preservation of digital cultural heritage, and that is really the subject for today, but I'm going to take a slightly unusual angle because I want to look at the ways in which digital heritage is the same, but different from other types of heritage. And my conclusion will be that we face similar challenges, but they arise in unexpected ways and they change how we might want to approach the preservation of digital materials. I'm going to start by giving you a maybe regular presentation around digital preservation. I'm going to give you some themes, some ideas, but just to fill you in on the necessaries before moving into a more of a experimental think piece around what I'm calling the Valley of Abandoned Technology. And I'll explain more about that in a moment, where I'm going to explore the economic forces which create obsolescence in the first place. That will lead me to a little sidebar around the concept of technical debt, at which point I'll move on to just a final thought, just very brief thought, around the protection of digital cultural heritage in the context of cyber warfare. So there's a lot to pack in to the next 15 minutes, and I'm looking forward to the conversation that will follow. Promise you first, though, to start the topic around digital preservation and just give you some key themes so we're all on the same page. Firstly, digital preservation typically makes bleak reading, and we all have some story or other of data loss that we can presumably share, and by all means put those in the chat if you're feeling inclined to do so. And perhaps we can explore some of those later, and I'm on hand for advice if that's what you would like. Let's remember that that question of data loss, digital preservation arises as a response to that experience, and we identify digital preservation therefore as a series of managed activities necessary to ensure continued access to digital materials for as long as necessary, beyond the limits of media degradation, technical obsolescence, or organizational change. There's a lot packed into those little bold words. So it's not a single task, it's a series of activities. It's not everything forever, it's for what we need, for as long as necessary. And we have spent a great deal of time and effort in the preservation community looking at media degradation, technical obsolescence, and to a lesser extent also organizational change. Let's briefly remember digital cultural heritage could be in any kind of format. All sorts of different materials fall into scope, therefore, are at stake for those experiences of data law: structured data, unstructured data, things which are digitized, things which are born digital. Let me remind you of a little important distinction, that some materials are created only ever in digital form, and they need preservation. Some materials are digitized, and that creates a digital preservation need, but fundamentally, digitization is not digital preservation. They are related but distinct. That means all sorts of materials are in scope. Therefore, things from ephemera, from a selfie stick, to a space probe that's taken tens of years and billions to launch. All of the digital objects and digital materials arise, therefore, in scope. It includes things you're accountable for, things you want to look after. It includes the digital memory of the world, things which you're looking forward to accessing yourself in the future, things which will matter to you in 10 years' time that someone else is looking after, and really any digital object where the product or service lasts longer than the digital platform upon which it was built. And as a consequence, the digital preservation community increasingly is being looked to by agencies with all sorts of digital materials, not simply the memory institutions, but all manner of business and commercial interests where the digital materials are of importance because the products have a long life cycle. What's the problem? Why does this problem arise? Well, it arises for a whole number of reasons. 3 things to observe about this slide. Firstly, it's a long list, many different reasons. Secondly, the list is incomplete. So there are probably things which I've not thought of, and certainly things that we haven't yet addressed, which are going to arise in the long life cycle of a digital object. And thirdly, look close. Some of those issues are themselves dynamic, and as a consequence, it is necessary sometimes to just learn what you're doing and then relearn it to fix a problem and recognize that the fix is temporary and you're going to have to come back and look at how you fix it again. And these are really the core issues which have dominated digital preservation over the years. And if you were to enter digital preservation for the first time from outside, you would observe, I think, quite a niche but quite a detailed discussion around file format obsolescence, for example, or checksums to track the authenticity of a document or an object. You would find lots of information about migration or emulation pathways. All of these subjects are important, but I want to take us in a slightly different direction. I don't mean any disrespect to that work, but I want to take us in a slightly different direction to understand why obsolescence arises in the first place. And to do that, I'm going to take you to the valley of abandoned technology. So we've known for quite a while that money turns out to be a major problem facing the future of our digital heritage. Not simply the digital heritage as well, I would add, but fundamentally we need investment. We can't preserve this material for free. But I think this early observation of David Rosenthal turns out to be truer than perhaps we had realized. And that's because, you know, in the context of digital preservation, we have addressed all manner of technical issues. And meanwhile, in Silicon Valley, services are deleted and deprecated. So the long list of things which have been lost in the last 20 or 30 years, you're more likely to find it in the long list of services which have been discontinued than you would find it in the long list of file formats which have become obsolete. And meanwhile, in Silicon Valley, they've been getting on deleting the content for us. My point here is that in many cases, it transpires that data loss arises because of someone else's business decision and because of some dependency that you have on some service that you may or may not recognize as being important. So let's look at that question of interdependence. Let's remember even just a simple example, a Word document emailed from one user to another. And that Word document, you know, will contain text. That text will be represented to the user by a font. And let's look at that relationship between user, font, and text. Well, Sometimes the font will be transferred with the document, and you'll get a true representation of that document when it arrives at your own desktop. Sometimes the word processor will do clever things and it will replace the font, and you'll never notice the difference. Perhaps you will, perhaps you won't, but you can still read a document, and that's fine. Sometimes the font will be lost. Sometimes the connection to the font will no longer be available, and that's when problems arise. And this is a really, really simple example, really basic example, because it's probably the simplest type of exchange you could have. Okay, and I'm trying to tease out the relationship between the informational content, which is the text, and the way that informational content is represented in order for it to be useful. And that's an example, a very simple example, of the kind of interdependence which is going to come to matter more. Let's scale this up. So I've used a word processing example that couldn't be older. Let's think about cloud computing. Let's take, for example, Google Docs. So if you were to work in the cloud, remember, it's no longer a definitive software release. It's no longer even really a file. It's a series of symbolic links which are assembled on the fly and presented back to you. The file doesn't even really exist. And for that matter, the software is assembled on demand, and the software will change depending on the assembly that is put together at any given moment. So you're renting your data, and you're renting also the software to use or to render that data. Why that matters? Well, it matters because in our generation, we become used to renting, not owning. This is rentier capitalism or techno-feudalism, to use another exotic phrase. The point is, we've moved from having data centers to clouds where we rent our own data back, where we have no longer record collections, but we have playlists, and we don't own the records, we are licensing the playlist. Where we no longer have a hard copy book, we have an e-book which is licensed to us under terms which are restrictive, out of our control potentially. And we no longer have a DVD collection, we have Netflix streaming whenever we want, whatever we want. It's creating an economic dependence on someone else's business model. And those dependencies are dispersed across multiple platforms and multiple services, and guarantee that those platforms and services will change. And that's where I want to just pause for a moment on economic forces. You might as well mention Twitter in this context, X, and you're probably aware of this week's problems that Twitter has, especially with the Supreme Court in Brazil. A series of complicated but maybe misguided business decisions lead an important content platform to a dangerous territory in terms of data loss, and the likelihood or the possibility of significant amounts of digital cultural heritage being simply lost because of a series of business decisions on one important platform. But it's not just one company making some ill-judged decisions that I want to draw attention to. This fundamentally is structural. To remember the phrase on Silicon Valley, to move quickly and to break things. So pause for a moment, and let's hear, for the sake of argument, Meta, Facebook. Look at the mismatch between share valuation and balance sheets, which has characterized the technology stocks. Facebook was valued at around 104 billion US dollars when shares were first sold. And that's a lot compared to the 6 billion or so of actual assets that it owned. That's 100 billion in intangible assets. And that might as well be the data. But the point is, it's grown an awful lot since then. And it's tipped over the $1 trillion mark in around 2021 before losing a whopping $232 billion in one single day, being the 2nd of February 2022. Now, I'm not expecting Facebook to go anywhere soon, but that's still $250 billion. It's a massive change in value in a single moment. And we've never had to deal with anything of this magnitude before, I don't suppose. And my point is, the value of companies like this is ephemeral. The flight of capital is in the long term inevitable, and that data loss thereby follows. So you might term that extinction as a service. So why is digital preservation hard? Well, I think technical debt is a phrase we should rehearse. And what I'm saying here is that agencies that plan for the long term will have in mind the long-term cost of ownership, and they'll build and budget accordingly. Agencies that fail to think about the long term and the uses of data that arise will ignore the advice of archivists and the heritage sector, but will fundamentally attempt to transfer that technical debt to them. And our job, ultimately, is to make obsolescence obsolete. One brief additional thought. I wanted to observe that we have in the cultural area all sorts of useful legislation and regulation which protects cultural heritage in times of conflict. UN Charter, for example, or the Blue Shield, which provide for the protection of cultural heritage, including digital cultural heritage, in times of war. But let's then put that same set of regulations and law, that same family of law, into this world of any connected device. It's no longer clear to me where the combat zone is. Any device potentially can be subverted for participation in cyber warfare. And as a consequence, I very strongly feel we need to start thinking about how we put digital cultural heritage off limits for cyber warfare. We currently have no blue shield on this electronic battlefield, and that raises all sorts of questions which I'm not yet ready to answer. What I want to tell you, therefore, is that digital heritage is the same but different, and here's why. Because we have introduced all manner of economic dependencies and exposure to capital shifts of massive quantities, the kinds of which we've never been exposed to before in the heritage sector. And because we can no longer properly define things like the battlefield in order that we can better protect first-rate heritage objects which express in digital form. I very much look forward to the conversation, and thank you very much for your attention today.
Well, thank you very much, William. And yes, so much food for thought. I was very excited when you agreed to speak, because this is something that I think many of us haven't really thought much about, or perhaps only struggled with in the confines of our own offices and desks. And it's a huge issue. Can we now have all of the speakers in the first session back up on screen, please? Because we're going to now go into the Q&A discussion. And remember, if you do have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and I'll be very happy to read them out. We all coming back now? Yep. All right. I'm going to kick off now with well, we're talking about international frameworks, right? And the fact that we need to work out how we're going to have some international collaborations and international frameworks. How helpful are they? How helpful are international frameworks? How helpful are international charters and guidelines? Can they be stronger? Can they be used in different ways, in better ways? Could they have more impact? There's many of them. You know, there's things like the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. There's the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Intangible Cultural Heritage List, and of course the all-powerful that Susan referred to, the World Heritage List. With William's comments about we need to somehow collaborate and work out what we're doing and fight back, or at least tackle these problems. Can you talk to us about the strength or the lack of strength of international frameworks and guidelines? Who wants to go first?
Well, I'll take the opportunity. You've had me on record, so I'll say a word briefly. I mean, I think in the context, I'm going to really reflect on the digital preservation experience, where collaboration is essential. Partnerships on discussion today from the other sort of types of heritage perhaps have been kind of mouth-watering for me. We need these types of collaboration. They don't exist, I think, sufficiently in our own in the field I represent here. And it's going to be the only way to address many of the issues that I perceive in our space, because no one has a sufficient grasp of all of the issues that we face. And the only way really to proceed is to bring people together. So I kind of look forward to copying some of the work that's presented here. I look forward to learning and maybe learning from your own observations and reflections on what has worked well and why.
Well, Susan and Julian, what's worked well and why, and what hasn't?
I'm happy to leap in, Susan, initially. I think it's an interesting issue that, in fact, Alex, we privately discussed some weeks ago around the evolution of collaborations between East and West. And I think through my experience working in China, from the early days and I should preface this by saying that Susan has vastly more experience in that field, but my observations are over the last 15 years has been that from two very different angles to preservation of cultural heritage, there has been a progressive meeting of the minds around the value of both approaches. And I mentioned briefly the ICOMOS China principles. They came off the back of the Australian ICOMOS Borough Charter. They were put together by the Getty with Sharon Sullivan playing a key role in that. And they essentially brought that Western view into Chinese thinking and brought the particular Chinese view on it. There's a very interesting process going on in the materials conservation world at the moment, which is that China is taking the lead on establishing standards for conservation. So they are leading the International Standards Organization, ISO's creation of standards. It's an area pretty fraught because there is work going on in the US, there's work going on in China, in Europe, and there's work going on in the UK, all on standards for conservation. And how you bring it together internationally. China's stuck up its hand and said, yeah, let's have a go at this. And all strength to them. IC is supporting them in their endeavor. And I think it won't standardize conservation approach, but it will create much dialogue. And I think there is so much to be learned both ways from that.
Thank you. Susan, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, I was going to say, going back to your original question, I do think that there is value in some of these charters and guidelines that we use, and in our partnerships that we're working, and I see this also in my work at the ICOMOS 20th Century Committee and things, that why they are helpful and useful is that they can provide a common understanding and a common terminology and a common language to have a conversation. And so a starting point might be those international charters or guidelines. But I think what's really important is to make them appropriate and relevant in the local context. And so, we at the Getty use a values-based approach, which, probably comes from the Borough Charter, is very heavily influenced by that and the work that was done in the 90s on that. But translating it, how does that work in another context, in Myanmar or in China or in Morocco or in Peru and places like that. So I think, and of course that was always the purpose, the idea behind the Venice Charter and the Borough Charter, to have these local versions of them. So for me, those primary charters are tremendously helpful and useful as a starting point, but then it's thinking about how do we make them locally, culturally specific, appropriate, usable, and use that language. I think when we're doing training, it's really important. Often the most important training we can ever do is about the methodology, because if everybody knows how to follow or how to think about a process that is culturally and contextually appropriate, they can know decision making. And so that's where I think they are pretty useful. I think what's happened is that there's a bit of an explosion in the charters world these days. So it kind of, there's a lot of them. And sometimes you need to kind of come back to the ones that are the most useful. I think if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals internationally and how that's played out, that's become a pretty important key approach that's being rolled out in many different countries now and again at least just provides a platform to have common conversations, because sometimes we need to be working locally, but we also need to be working regionally and internationally as well. And so sometimes we do need to be able to have a common platform to establish, you know, goals and priorities and have some common understanding of what we're doing and why, and then how. I don't know if that answered your question or not. But
it's really interesting. Thank you. Yes. Fiona, did you want to add to that at all?
Yes, thanks, Alex. I just wanted to say that from the perspective of diplomacy, partnerships and frameworks are all important. And for a middle power like Australia, you know, we rely completely on having good relationships and good partnerships, and on international frameworks of law and of guidelines for everything from trade to heritage to everything around international humanitarian law and law of warfare, for example, law of the sea. So this idea that particularly when we come to new areas of technology like the digital heritage, it's really important to have frameworks around those, and it's something that policymakers and decision makers are grappling with, how to have established frameworks and ways of thinking about and looking at and regulating new spaces and new technologies. So I think it's really important.
Thank you. Can I throw a spanner in the works, though, thinking about frameworks and guidelines and declarations have been developed in a certain type of world. We're now hitting a different type of world. Well, how do we protect heritage in times of war and conflict? You know, we've mentioned Blue Shield. It's not working very well in Ukraine or in Gaza. What do we do? What else can we do? What's beyond the frameworks and guidelines? What sort of international collaboration can we call on for those protect these incredibly significant places? And if you can answer that, that'll be great. And we do need to let more people.
Ooh, that's a really difficult question, Alex. I mean, I think that we often fall back on the Hague Convention and some of those core international frameworks for cultural heritage or human rights, or, you know, other frameworks that are in place when heritage is threatened. But ultimately, they and I suppose it, you know, they're as good as the international system can police them, if you like, which you know, I think in times of war can be very difficult. So I don't know, that's a very big question. I don't think I can answer it very easily in a short time. I don't know if anyone can have a crack at that in a better way, but
well, I'm thinking lessons from that for William, because William's talking about when we're in thrall, we're controlled by these behemoth giant tech organizations for so much of our cultural digital heritage. What we learn from what's not working now that we can apply to how we tackle the future of digital heritage preservation. That's another way coming at this question another way.
Yeah, and maybe I could follow up Susan's kind of comments as well. And I share entirely, Susan, your sense of how do we solve that, right? This is a massive question. I think you quote the examples of Ukraine, of Palestine. There are other examples too one could look at. And maybe the only comforting observation I would give here is that it's not simply the heritage charters which are failing to deliver in that context. These are fundamentally bigger problems, and a breakdown of the kind of rule-based order, as it were, of governments and law and so forth. And without kind of getting into the details of any of those, well, actually, we need those frameworks at a higher level to be operational and functional in order that we can deliver the promise of some of those other pieces. Thinking about the digital, we find ourselves, as you say, partly enthralled to these large corporations who are in many cases not necessarily outside of the law, but the case in Brazil, I think, clearly demonstrates the tensions that exist between these large corporations and the sovereignty of the state and the governance thereby. And so we really need to start thinking of different ways of addressing cultural heritage in the digital space. I mean, I say sort of the same but different. There are certain things we need to be looking at which by default have to work internationally, which cannot necessarily rely purely on national endeavour. And that leads me kind of very encouraged by Fiona's presentation as a consequence, but also by the other presentations we've heard around the sort of charters and documents, the engagement with, Julian's examples of the engagement with China. All of these really are going to be, this provides hope that there is some way of working beyond the boundaries of individual nation states, because in the digital space, we're going to very much need that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. I have another question here about I can never say this word, reciprocity. Okay, spell it, but I can't say it. It does seem to be a key theme in terms of relationships and reciprocity. But there's also, Sue in particular, I think Susan, you talked about power imbalances. And so we've got power imbalances, but we've also got a key theme about reciprocity. How does that balance out? How does that work in terms of partnerships? How do you therefore look to partner with someone that's equal power as you? Does that mean it's mainly with governments or larger corporations? Or how does it work with a power imbalance, but having a reciprocal relationship between a larger organization and a community, for example, on a heritage project?
I'm happy to leap in here in terms of the specific issue of IC and the International Training Centre, because there's a massive power imbalance at one level. There's Chinese government and a very large amount of money being put into the training centre, and our skills in terms of professional conservators to come and run the training centre courses. I think it is one of very much mutual respect, and I think it's Susan mentioned this issue of personal relationships. It like it or not, it does come down to it. I mean, it's interesting that the ITCC happened because Dr. Shan, who was director of the Palace Museum, in a sense, made good friends of Sarah Staniforth, who was my predecessor as president. He always used to refer to her as his girlfriend. And that actually got it all going, actually. And it probably wouldn't have happened if that happened. And I'd like to think I've now got a very good relationship with his successor, and there's lots of things we're planning. So you can't get away from that human interaction. And I'm sure we've all seen it in our working lives. So in a sense, that overrides the power imbalance to allow the process to proceed.
And I would just say that, there are usually imbalances but they're of a different nature too, because sometimes there's a difference between real power and perceived power. So, sometimes we come along as this big, wealthy US-based organization, and people sort of think that you're going to bring lots of money and therefore you're super influential and you're very powerful. Like one, we usually don't bring lots of money, but secondly, we have no role. We have no power. We have nothing when we go to these places. And so, as Julian said, we might be working with a government, but we're kind of no one, if you like. But what we are bringing is support where they need it. And it sometimes takes a while for them to understand that they are actually really in control. And in some places where we work, the power imbalance is very much, we get pushed around quite a lot in ways that we may or may not like. But I mean, I think it's just really important to be very aware of what that is and to sort of explain it. And that's about expectations and things like that. But, I think when you're looking at in the foreign, in the areas of we're an independent foreign organization, if you like. We're not a government, that we could be perceived the same way. But, sometimes where you have governments which are beholden to other more powerful governments, you witness very obvious power imbalances, and heritage being, the heritage outcomes are often not good because the people on the ground don't always get to express what's needed. And they might have things that might happen that are contrary to to the laws and things, and the people actually in the heritage positions that are trying to manage that have a pretty difficult time. So it is a thing in this space. But I think, you know, as we as ethical professionals our role is to sort of recognize what they are, to talk about them when we can and when it's appropriate, and to determine how that impacts your work, and then to think about what that might be, and also recognize that it might change over time. You know, the partner may begin not being able to bring much, but then it might totally reverse. When the Getty first went to China, they brought a lot of the resources and the money and expertise to do that work, and now it's completely the other way around. And I think if you look at the site of Angkor Wat in Cambodia, that's had a lot of foreign aid over many, many years, they've become increasingly self-sufficient. And so that, I don't know if it's a power imbalance, but that sort of balance of expertise and reciprocity, I can't say it either, has really sort of shifted. And that's great when you see it shifting towards self-determination and self-sufficiency, and all of us foreign folks can go away. That's success, I think.
And I'm glad you mentioned ethics, because I just point out that AusHeritage did a very good, excellent 4-hour seminar symposium last year, which is still online, on ethics and heritage practice, and we've had some terrific conversations and questions. And so we all need to be across our ethics and continually question them, and that's a very useful resource for people. One quick final question: can commercial investment turn into real collaboration and co-governance? Who's going to have a crack at this one?
I mean, I don't know. I think you can have very successful public-private partnerships where the public partner has the structure and the capacity to engage in a way that brings benefit for heritage. You know, I think we've all seen really good examples of that when it can be well managed, it can be well directed, and the aims of you can build into it standards for work and expectations for good heritage outcomes. I think, you know, Australia's done some fantastic public-private partnerships, and I think we're increasingly seeing that as a model in other countries. But there are some ingredients, I think, for success. And I think good legislation, good regulation, and good the ability for the public sector to be able to actually sustain good outcomes and standards is pretty important.
Thank you.
If I could,
yes, please,
try that as well. Just one last observation then, sorry, is yes, I think it can, and I think in the digital space it kind of needs to, but it comes back to exactly where you spoke earlier around ethics. So if the ethics are firm and understood and shared, the opportunity is strong. Where they're not, then there's a risk of it going off in the deep end.
Yeah, thank you. And I just again put in another plug really for the International Council of Museums, which are going through a very intense process of reviewing and updating their code of ethics. It's going to be a significant change, and it's something that impacts everyone, and every museum signs up to those when they're members of ICOM, and it's been a privilege contributing to that. All right, thank you very much, our 4 wonderful speakers. And if you can hang around for the next session, that's great. But I understand if you need to go, and Susan, if you need to go to bed, that's absolutely fine. But thank you so much, my 4 wonderful speakers. Thank you. It's now time for session 2, implications for heritage practice. And we have a panel of 3 more outstanding heritage practitioners. And I'll introduce them all now, and then each will speak straight after each other, leaving us a 20-minute Q&A and discussion time. So if you start thinking of questions, please pop them in the Q&A box. The first panelist is Mr. David Goll. David is a principal and sector lead of heritage at Architectus Conrad Gargett Architects, Australia, with over 30 years experience as a heritage architect, working on both Australian and international projects. His work is focused on the design, documentation and delivery of built heritage projects, including the conservation, adaptive reuse and contemporary additions to heritage buildings and sites, including 20th century modern heritage places. David is a current board member with AusHeritage and is a member of the Queensland Heritage Council. He was a Getty Guest Scholar in 2020 and is an adjunct professor in the School of Architecture at the University of Queensland, Australia. The next speaker is Professor Alex Yen, who is currently Professor at the Department of Architecture at the China University of Technology in Taipei City in Taiwan. He's also the Director of the Centre for Cultural Sites Rehabilitation and Development at the China University of Technology, and he's Chair of the Chinese Association on the Preservation of Cultural Heritage. His experience includes a lot of work with various ICOMOS committees. He's chair of the 25th International SEPA Symposium, that's the Heritage Documentation Scientific Committee of ICOMOS, and vice president of that committee. He's an expert member of the Scientific Committee on Risk Preparedness, ICORP for ICOMOS. He's a director of the Architectural Institute of Taiwan, a member of the Academic Council of Traditional Houses Association of China, managing supervisor of Chinese Cultural and Fine Arts Association, member of the Historic Site Review Committee of the Ministry of the Interior. Alex has pre-recorded his session since he is in China at the moment, but we're hopeful that he can join us for the Q&A. The final panelist is Bruce Petman, who is the retired former Director for Heritage, Environment and Planning for New South Wales Public Works. He's been a conservation architects and heritage specialist since 2000. He has 48 years professional experience as an architect and heritage architect, and the last 38 have been involved specifically with the design, implementation and management of historic public building conservation projects and programs and advisory services within the state government public works agencies in South Australia and New South Wales. He's a member of numerous government and non-government technical advisory committees, too numerous for me to name. For 30 years, Bruce also provided heritage conservation capacity building training and advice in South Asia and Southeast Asia, including in Taiwan, Hong Kong, Malaysia and Indonesia, as well as leading conservation works and projects for the World Bank, for UNESCO, for national government cultural agencies, and for private sector projects. In 2003, he received an Australian Centenary Federation Medal for services to the conservation of historic buildings. Bruce has been a former Deputy Chair of AusHeritage and is now an honorary life member. So welcome to all three of you. And please, can we hear from David Gold first?
Thank you, Alex, for the introduction. And hello, everyone. Okay. So I've been really lucky enough to be working on conservation of built heritage focused on 2 international locations, one in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and also in Myanmar since 2013. So I'd like to share a little of my practice collaboration journeys and then finish with some key observations and reflections as well as thinking about the future. So both of these 2 international practice journeys are long-term, and both are founded on collaborations and partnership that are many multi-layered and interconnected, and I see them more like a network or sort of constellation of collaborations. So these partners have included universities, NGOs, cultural institutions, as well as government bodies and agencies. But really, most importantly, in each location, there's been an initial building of a collective of local partners and support networks on the ground in the form of local practitioners. So this has included local architects, heritage specialists, curators, engineers, service consultants, as well as those involved in specialist trades. The first partnership journey in Myanmar happened really somewhat organically around Australian government aid funding, while the second in Ethiopia was really highly structured and based around a commercial project, winning a contract with the United Nations to conserve a 20th century significant building. Myanmar really began with capacity building through education and training, ultimately leading to collaboration with a local architectural practice working on multiple projects as their international partner. So I've just tried to do my own very simple sketch diagram, which really outlines this matrix of collaborations from 2013 to 2020, when the project work we're undertaking was very sadly put on hold owing to the coup in Myanmar and, of course, the COVID epidemic. But starting at the top was that education focus with an invitation from University of Queensland to collaborate on a DFAT-funded Built Heritage Conservation Training program. And this led then to an invitation to join the Yangon Heritage Trust in a position funded by DFAT as their senior heritage architect in 2015, where then I was able to support over 70 projects in this of the 3,500 surveyed colonial era buildings within the 1 square mile of downtown Yangon conservation area, which is pictured here, as well as at that stage securing AusAid funding to deliver training for much needed heritage skills training, which happened then over the next 3 years. So I guess these collaborations sort of started to unfold and really grow, organically. And then I was able to support a number of pilot demonstration conservation projects, which included developing a further collaboration with the NGO Turquoise Mountain. So this included the Merchant Street project as pictured here. And in my Yangon Heritage Trust role, we then jointly organised with Turquoise Mountain and delivered many heritage skills training programs around this project, things like terracotta roofing, plaster, brick conservation, timber joinery, and found that really working collaboratively was a far more effective approach. We were able to combine our resources and budgets and really deliver better training and project outcomes as a result. So the collaborations as an international partner with a local architectural practice, Statement Architecture, they really came, very much later. So this included many projects in Yangon and Koror. I've pictured here concept designs from the Koror market, which included the renovation and upgrade of a historic market with 500 shops, again, sadly put on hold owing to the coup and COVID. So here again is this collaboration map sort of built organically over time, and you can see that education is in purple, government agencies in red, and NGOs in pink. So I guess just wanting to give that sort of visual of the sort of collective of collaborators to enable, success on the ground. So the second focus for collaboration is in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. This was highly structured and organized, and as I said, based on winning a contract with the United Nations in 2013 to conserve and renovate Africa Hall, which is a place of high significance and symbolic importance to the African continent. So this building was a gift from Emperor Haile Selassie to the African continent in 1961 as a venue for holding meetings for decolonization of Africa and the formation of the African Union and ongoing meetings for the African Union, as well as the function and operation of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa from 1961 to the present. This project is still underway to be completed actually this month after 10 years, including upgrading building services, new conference facilities, a new visitor centre, as well as compliance and access upgrades, as well as a new permanent exhibition to tell the story of the place and its role in Pan-African history, as part of opening the building to the public. So success on the ground over these many years has really relied on building very strong and enduring relationships. And again, this sketch sort of crudely shows the shape of the collaboration mapping. And after winning the project in 2013, actually, one of the first things I did was reach out to Susan McDonald, if she's still there, and the Getty Conservation Institute, and have to thank Susan for her support since 2013, with the Getty sort of generously providing access to their network of experts and publications. And this was really essential to myself and my team as we sort of developed our approach to conserving this 20th century modern heritage project. And I was also lucky enough to benefit from some of the GCI's training programs. But we also immediately developed a relationship with the University of Addis Ababa, sort of the purple dot, employing 2 new architectural graduates in 2014, one of whom is now our local studio manager and local project architect. We also developed relationships with the local architectural practice, as well as local partners for each of our international consultants. So I guess the smaller circle in the center sort of shows the shape of the local team, with each international discipline having, a local equivalent. So ultimately, our success in delivering our project, has really relied on this successful and enduring partnership network. So just very quickly, some reflections. Firstly, take a long-term view, focus on 1 or 2 key opportunities, and really consider a point of entry, maybe through education, training, and capacity building. And this may take many years in itself to establish. Foster key partners, foster complementary partners based on respectful knowledge sharing and shared goals and values. I think that's been a real theme today. Building trust and respect and really key personal relationships. Ensure local partners are leading wherever possible, and think about what you can offer a local partner that they can't already do themselves, and how an international partner might add value. And be genuine, generous and humble. Be prepared to bring something to the table, and certainly be prepared to, give more than you receive. So I feel really incredibly lucky and humbled to have had these 2 amazing collaboration opportunities, which have really enriched my practice. So just to finish, some thoughts about future collaborations. And they'll, of course, need to consider and be built around the challenges of disaster management, climate change mitigation, aftermath of conflict and war, and the associated issues around mass migration and refugees. And it's just interesting in regularly tracking the UNDP opportunities. There's many opportunities coming to market, based around addressing these issues. And I think this is likely to continue. The images here are Case in Jordan, and that's one such current UNDP example. And this project is really built around capacity building in the township adjacent to the World Heritage Site of Case, which is the World Heritage Site's pictured on the bottom, and the right-hand image is the adjacent village. But the project sort of aims to build livelihoods through building renovations and projects that can facilitate development of the cultural tourism industry to support livelihoods in the town and region under extreme pressure from the Syrian refugee crisis. And I think this type of project model, which includes capacity building for local communities and the local community as a key partner, is likely to continue. So thank you so much for this opportunity to share some insights today, and back to you, Alex.
Okay, thank you very much. For some reason, my video won't start, but it is now. Excellent, because you want to see me, don't you? Thank you, David. That was really lovely. I now turn to Alex Yen and his presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, my dear colleagues. I'm Alex Yan from Taiwan. It's my honor to have this presentation on the AusHeritage in Taiwan in this symposium. This is Taiwan, the place you are familiar with. And we have Conservation Act since 1982, and in 2000, 2005, and 2016, we have 3 major revises. As you may know, in the 1999, we have a very severe earthquake and attacked a lot of the monuments and historical buildings. At that time, we revised our Conservation Acts. And in the year 2014, we have Taiwan Principle on the Conservation of Cultural Heritage. Of course, we learned a lot of ideas from the broad chapter. And 2019, we revised it, the principle again. And now we have a Conservation Act since 2016. And it's the latest revised edition. And we have 2 main categories, so-called tangible and intangible. And based on the cultural value priority conservation, and highlight the conservation plan should integrate with the master plan. And of course, the public participation is very, very important issue in the this acts. And you can see the number of the cultural heritage in Taiwan at this moment, tangible and intangible. And the type of the built heritage is various in Taiwan. We have temple, residence, walled cities, and of course the 20th century heritage, and as well as industrial heritage. And AusHeritage in Taiwan came to Taiwan since 2002, and it can separate into 4 different time periods. The first gentleman come to Taiwan from AusHeritage is my best friend, Bruce Patman. In the year 2002, Bruce, together with the other 2 Japanese gentlemen, came to Taiwan. At that time, we want to learn the idea of the conservation and want to link with the world. So we try to set up our own potential World Heritage site in Taiwan. Not tentative this because we are not a member of the UNESCO, but however, we want to learn the idea and how they implement these ideas. And at that time, we set up 12 potential sites in Taiwan, and now we have 18 potential World Heritage sites. And Jinmen is one of the 18th. And of course, you know that Jinmen is very, very near mainland China. And during the past 10 years, we took Qin-Chonglin settlements as an example for the implement for the World Heritage experiences in Jinmen. And Jinmen is an island full of culture and nature, tangible and intangible. And but in the very beginning, from the idea of the government, they think that the value of Jinmen is the battlefield culture, battlefield only. But since 2012, we invite AusHeritage team came to Taiwan and in Jinmen for 7 times, so-called Jinmen 1 to Jinmen 7. We have not only lecture, but also workshop. We learn the idea from the AusHeritage step by step. You can see during the past 7 years, different topic was discussed before the lecture, and thanks to AusHeritage, they select proper speakers come to Taiwan to help us to learn. So in the first team is led by Ian Cooks, and Mary and Peter and Gil come to Taiwan to tell us what is so-called heritage management plan. And it took 2 years. Hazer is come to the second years. And the third years, we have Bruce, Helen, and Nina. And the main theme is HIA and the DCP. And the fourth years, we have Kurt and Alex to re-understand the very important issue, so-called local knowledge as a resource for development in the year 2015. And the 2016, we have Jen Harlington, and 2017, we have Peter Phillip, Sharon, and Bruce came to Jinmen to let us understand the importance of 5C strategies to assist government and the NGO. And the 2018, we have idea from the serious property. And besides in Jinmen, we have AusHeritage team in Taiwan with to help us to hold the World Heritage Workshop. You can see it's Duncan Marshall, I think. And also we have a World Heritage Lecture. You can see the Vino has come to Taiwan to have a open speech. And also we invite Steve Brown and Susan come to Taiwan. And we also signed the MOU with our university, very cute university, and the Bureau of Cultural Heritage signed the MOU to strengthen the collaboration. And we also revised the MOU in the year 2018 and 19. And also a very important publication, so-called conservation plan, the 7th edition in Chinese edition was published in 2017. Very important milestone for our collaboration. And also international lectures, we have Peter and Sharon again, and the Catherine Force to come to Taiwan 2019. And besides that, of course, the social activity, it can help us to know each other's very well. And during though during the pandemic, we have to stop the Kinmen workshop. However, we still have some practical implement in Chonglin villages, so-called regeneration of historical site. And all the master plan of this regeneration of Chonglin was based on the outcome from the Jinmen 1 to Jinmen 7. And you can see a lot of outcome from that project. And even during the pandemic, we still have online meeting, online presentation with our colleagues from AusHeritage, Bruce Patman and Peter Romy. Thanks for their help. And after the pandemic, in this year, we have Kinmen 8 again, and we invite Peter Romy and John Harlington to come to Taiwan and come to Jinmen to have a lecture to introduce the new trend and the relevant management. And also besides the lecture, we have a forum and a workshop, and also we invite them to New Taipei City to make a presentation to the general public. And of course, team from Taiwan also visit Australia in the year 2016. And last year's in the ICMOS GA, the DG Chen of the BOCH and the teams from Taiwan, we visit AusHeritage. Thank you for your reception, and we have very, very warming night in Sydney. And maybe I can make some summarize for some key issues we learned from the AusHeritage. Of course, the main concept of the Bura Charter is the most important, and we also learned the idea of World Heritage from the Bura Charter to the management plan. We learned the DCP and the HIA, and we know the importance of the serious property, what it means. And of course, it's not enough for us from this year's. I think we have to rethinking the resilience and sustainability is the most challengeable issues for all the world heritage or all the cultural heritage all over the world. So the 5 Cs and the cooperation and integration is the most important for us to step forward. Thanks for the AusHeritage come to Taiwan and Germany to help us during the past 20 years. And we are looking forward to have more friendship and support and interactive from both sides. And it's my great honor to have this presentation. And I have to thank for all the support, all the friends to help us during the past several years. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex, for that beautiful overview of the rich and long-standing relationship between AusHeritage and yourself and your organizations and other organizations in Taiwan. It's a beautiful case study of many of the principles that the speakers were referring to in our first session. I'd now like to ask Bruce Petman to give us the last presentation. Bruce.
Good afternoon, or hi, everybody. Being the last speaker, you've all said it, and you've said it all. I'm very pleased to be participating in this symposium, and very much agree with everything that everybody has said so far. You've stolen quite a few comments that I was wanting to make, but as I said, I fully support all of the statements that the previous speakers have made, and very impressed with the PowerPoint from Alex Yen with the history of AusHeritage's involvement in Taiwan. Partnerships and a little bit later, I'll just comment on memorandums of understanding, but partnerships are a key, or have been a key role in my involvement internationally on heritage conservation activities, including capacity building, specific projects, and building relationships. I started out being engaged internationally because the state of South Australia was looking to find opportunities for all kinds of professional practitioners, including heritage practitioners, internationally. And initially I was charged with the responsibility for finding and introducing South Australian heritage consultants to potential heritage projects in the region, in the Asia and West Pacific region. And that became an extraordinary gateway experience to, as everybody's said, the opportunity and the need to develop relationships and partnerships and long-standing engagement with our colleagues and counterparts within the region. It's taken a long time. And as you have noticed with that progressive plan on the Taiwan engagement, it began in 2022, and an MOU was created much later to really cement the relationships and the good standing, the trust and the reliability, the understanding of cultural values and practices, and understanding the context of what some areas of the region and some people inquiring to us what they may need assistance with. It's been an extraordinary and diverse opportunity to participate firsthand, and actually also bringing people on board. So not only in Taiwan, but my involvements with World Bank projects in a World Bank project in Bali, the conservation of a synagogue in Hong Kong, the AusHeritage engagement with city government and national government in Jakarta, and the even longer standing engagement with the Penang Heritage Trust and the people of Penang in the conservation of significant places, beginning with Suffolk House, historic Anglo-Indian garden house, but leading into relationships with the Penang Heritage Trust and forming good networks and bringing along Australian specialists to participate. And it was an interesting opportunity to determine which people would be appropriate for working with local counterparts and local communities to explain or to do capacity building or to just assist to what local communities in some of these places needed to get from us to understand what conservation is about, to deal with the 5 Cs, as Alex was mentioning, but also matching people together, getting involved in international work, as most of the previous speakers have mentioned, is getting engaged person to person and to understand and to build relationships before there is a trust, before there is that respect obviously occurring, and understanding each other's needs and having confidence to talk to each other and to present to local communities, to government agencies and the like. So the partnerships that we've established have been from within Australia, taking teams of people who have the relevant experience and the appropriate empathy and understanding of cultural differences, and also joining partnerships with international agencies and the like through various different opportunities, either contractually through having to tender for works, knowing there'll be a local counterpart engaged as well. That worked extremely well in Bali with Balinese and Javanese heritage specialists, and working together as a team to develop multiple projects for eventual implementation, which occurred in the early 2000s. I've thought that we learn as much as we impart. It's so important, and a couple of people have pointed out the generosity that's needed. We need to give more than we receive, but we do receive an extraordinary amount of value and information and personal development through engagements of this nature. International partnerships in heritage practices in particular bring out an understanding of the communities and the peoples involved, and hopefully work towards that goodwill that Australia and others can have together. Perhaps the formalisation of these relationships is best illustrated with the MOUs that have been identified, and Vinod gave us that information at the beginning. But MOUs don't happen at the beginning. They are really formalising a partnership and an understanding and friendship and strong relationships after a certain period, and they enable the promotion and the acceptance by local communities, by local government agencies, that this partnership, this MOU, will deliver opportunities and benefits for the recipients of the conservation activities. And the diversity of people who can come and contribute has been very rewarding for me to understand what has been achieved by all those other people who've participated through AusHeritage and through our project activities. Partnerships are vital. They are a means of good delivery. And so I perhaps will leave it at that, and perhaps answer some questions if we've got them. I do appreciate as I said before, the comments from Susan on the principles of partnerships. That was extremely good. And access to networking, and perhaps we'll leave it at that and I'll come back. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bruce. Very thoughtful and based on years and years and years of experience and empathy. So thank you so much. So that was a thought-provoking session, and I'm wondering what questions we have that we can throw to these three panelists. I don't know, hopefully, yes, I think Alex Yen might be, yes, you're with us. Hi, Alex. Still on the bus.
Hi.
Fantastic. So we have Bruce, we have David, and we have Alex. And then from the earlier session, I know that Susan and William has just had to leave, but we still, I think, have Fiona. And yep, I think that's about it. Fiona and Julian, I think. Yes, hi, Julian. So if you could all basically appear back on screen. Thank you. And we have about 10 to 15 minutes for this. Thank you. Look, with such an emphasis on personal relationships, how do you keep a project or MOU on track when the individuals change?
I'll answer that. I think it's extremely important. And one of the notes I wrote to myself here was that there's a kind of responsibility for the signatories, at least, if not other members of a particular MOU, to keep up the relationships, either with just occasional discussions, speaking about heritage matters or general well-being. There are things that happen in other places that we take notice of, and we just want to retain that good relationship, and we care for the people who we have been working with for such a long time. So yeah, it's when people change, it does make a difference. And so refreshing an MOU is important, but promoting it, flying the flag here in Australia and elsewhere, that's a strong partnership or relationship going on into the future.
So you're saying basically communication is critical.
Yes, absolutely.
Succession planning or something like that. So there's not just all on one person.
Yeah. Succession planning would be great, and it needs to be people trying hard to do that. But it is so important to maintain that link, and it's person to person, really, as well as the organisations that are engaged in an MOU. Yeah.
Sure. David, you've been waving your hand, or is it just a random getting rid of a fly or something?
Look, I wasn't waving my hand, but I guess mine's probably slightly different in that, you know, for a very long-term project, you know, happening over 10 or 12 years, similar sort of issues, and it really is about communication very clearly. But I guess being able to really articulate, you know, you know, a project's you know, key, you know, principles, and, you know, what those shared sort of values are, so that if people change, you know, if there's changes to, you know, people along the way, which naturally happens, that, yeah, you can, yeah, you can bring them in, and sort of have that shared understanding. And I think that's something that's really key from the very outset, to be really clear about those things, so that everybody can equally, you know, can communicate sort of beyond, you know, to the broader network as well. Because you're not always the one who's going to be doing all of the communication, of course.
Thank you. And Alex, I mean, it was absolutely critical that you've been around for this length of time. You've been a huge importance. What have you been doing succession planning for when maybe one day you move on?
Can you repeat again? The connection's not so well. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just saying how important it has been for the relationship between your university and AusHeritage, that you have been there and you've been so assiduously, so powerfully advocating and working with it and reaching out. That's been critical. Have you brought other people in, or are you planning succession for when you might move on? Or I have noticed that you've always included your Director Generals as well, which has been great. But how do you see the future, really, if you are not there?
It's a challenge. That actually, our university working with AusHeritage maybe more than 20 years, I suppose. And actually, as I just presented, we learned a lot from the colleagues of AusHeritage. Of course, while we invited the teams from Austria, we have to squeeze all the experts from Austria to the last drops. So of course, besides the workshop in German, some other presentation are also invited while you're there or you are staying. And just in this case, I think more and more people know what is so-called AusHeritage, and also many events has happened during the past several years. And I think I agree with Bruce and some other colleagues say that an MOU needs a very concrete trust, and you have to maintain the MOU, just not sign the MOU only, but you have to develop the many possibility under the MOU. And in my university, because I'm teaching in university, so we have some young generations, young professors. They are working with the AusHeritage in the past few years. So I think we just revised our MOU last year in Sydney. So I think I'm very sure in the coming few years we will try to working with AusHeritage, and also we will like to introduce more potential partnership in Taiwan to you.
Right, great. That's a good, great plan. Thank you, Alex. Much as we love working with you. The question though then
My
is
pleasure.
Long-term relationship. How do you actually resource or fund long-term relationship building? That's a critical question. How do you resource or fund that? A sustainable one.
It depends where you come from, in the sense of where you're working. What's your day job? as well as what is your management, key management, senior management prepared to contribute or tolerate, and fund your time, really. Many of these activities nobody gets paid for it. You get expenses, but you don't get paid for it. And so some individuals sacrificed very generously their own time. Others, like myself, had the opportunity to utilize my position to do things like this on behalf of the state and the organisation, the department I belong to. So, but it's a cost, not only in the way of funding, but also in the way of family relationships too. It takes you away from your home for quite some time on some occasions, and then when it's repeated, it is another thing to be considered. I'm sure people who want to get engaged with this are very happy to, and so it usually pans out that those who have the opportunity and can do it will do it if they have that particular empathy and understanding and respect for the cultures they are going to be engaged with. So in short, it just depends where you're coming from in regards to how you can afford to do it.
Right. Well, I suppose I hope particularly with the presentation from Fiona Hogarth that there is an increased focus by the Australian government on supporting long-term relationship building. So we'll see.
DFAT has been extraordinarily helpful through this whole process in very many different places. And the cultural exchange is so important. It sort of bats above its weight in the sense of its impact. So getting engaged with these sorts of things.
So, Bruce, you mean the heritage relationships?
Heritage relationships, yes.
A huge dividend, yes. Way above what small amounts of money might be supporting it.
Yeah.
David, did you want to add?
Yeah, look, just to add to Bruce's comments, probably, certainly, that's really how it all started for me. I probably wasn't really intending to practice at all in, terms of the international space, but, DFAT very generously, funded both a training program and then the position that, I was later invited to, to apply for with the Yangon Heritage Trust. So, and look, to Bruce's point, the funding helped you get there and basically sustained you, but you had to be prepared. You had to want to do it and be prepared to really give a lot. So I think that's also part of it. It's got to be something that you personally are committed to. Obviously Africa was very different. I mean, that was a paid contract, but that gave the opportunity, in fact, to do a whole lot more. That you can then use the fact that you're in that privileged paid position to then really do capacity building for those who are on your team, and you become in this very privileged place to then start to build on that position. So yeah, I think it's an interesting question, but you do have to have some resources to sort of get started at least.
Yeah.
Indeed. Final question, and I'll kick that off with a question to you, Alex, and the others to come in. What are the benefits and pitfalls of working cross-culturally?
It's a very interesting question. I have to say that actually due to thanks to the technology, the world is globalized, is very fast. So before that, the cultural diversity we cannot easy to identify, but now it's very quickly to transfer the information and all the new messages. So when different culture meet together, we think there's some as the maybe in the first session some colleagues already mentioned. There are some basic principles, basic guidelines. There's universals. And under the universal guidelines, we can develop our own implementation process due to our local situation. So the culture, if I didn't misunderstanding what your questions, I think the different culture meet together also have some contradiction. But however, if we can respect different culture and the following some good example and best practice, then we can develop some solutions step by step. If I didn't misunderstand your questions.
Thank you. Is there anything, Bruce or David, that you wanted to add to that? Briefly?
I just wanted to thank Alex. Thank you very much. It's good to see him again. And
yeah, me too.
Okay, mate. see you soon sometime. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, David, you're right.
Yeah, look, I was just going to say, I mean, obviously the benefits, you know, clearly having this opportunity to work cross-culturally and having sort of being challenged in terms of how you work and how you understand, you know, process. And again, you have to be really sort of open to those ways of thinking. Pitfalls, obviously, you know, communication, having that common understanding and, you know, the challenges, you know, culturally of, you know, sometimes an expectation that, you know, you as the oldest person in the room should be the one who speaks and leads, and always really hard to, you know, kind of encourage others to be leading with you being in a support role. But look, we found that certainly in Ethiopia, you know, the first thing I did was to reach out to the university and to employ 2 new architectural grads. And they became these, and still are, these incredible cultural ambassadors. So, you know, we always have, you know, they communicate any sort of cultural misunderstandings, and you know, that's you know, there's incredible value in those relationships, in terms of you know, making sure that what you're doing is culturally appropriate, because I think it's very easy to misread and misunderstand, you know, what's required sometimes.
Indeed, and we haven't even mentioned the gender.
Yes.
That's another topic. Look,
can I say something very short?
You may, of course.
Yeah, sure. I think the most important things I learned from the past several years is happy to contribute, happy to learn, and happy to persuade some other people to support us, to join us. Always very happy. Thank you.
So much, Alex, and thank you, everyone. It's now time for me to hand back to Vinod, Chair of AusHeritage, for his closing remarks.
Thank you.
First of all, let me, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. So first of all, let me thank Julian, Susan, William, Fiona, David, Alex, Bruce. I was just calculating how many years of collective knowledge they brought together over the last 2.5 hours. It's probably more than 200 years worth of collective knowledge, and I think it's so rich. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think everyone would have benefited from what you shared. Thanks, Alex, for curating this and putting this together and thinking through the 2 themes, which were extremely practical. I took a lot of messages. I'm sure a lot of other people would have done the same. The message on the importance of people. I think people are key for things to be successful, and the people-to-people relationship is probably the fundamental aspect through which all these collaborations and long-term relationships have to be built. The importance of time. It's great to keep hearing stories on things that have happened over the last 10, 20, 30 years and how things have been built, over years. I think, it's great. And I think we all have to realize and respect, because again, in many cultures, the process is as important as outcomes. And it's great that in these relationships, you've got to give enough time for the process and building things. The thing on power imbalance changes with time. It kind of swings both ways, and you go through the ups and downs and the patience to work through it. The importance of collaboration and building respectful and trusting relationships over the long term. The need for steady and sustained resources so that these projects can succeed. And also the importance of MOUs and frameworks. It's extremely important that these frameworks are built, because then all the projects that come can kind of hang out, under these frameworks. So thank you so much for sharing so much thoughts. For people who would be keen to kind of go and visit some of these, to hear on some of these presentations. I think the presentations will be out on YouTube over the next week or so. And I'm pretty sure there'll be a link that would be shared to all the people who registered for this symposium. Please also do consider becoming a member of AusHeritage. I think it's exciting to be a member of AusHeritage. Please do visit our website, ausheritage.org.au, ausheritage.org.au, and do consider becoming a member of AusHeritage. So again, thank you so much. Thank you for the very, very fruitful and interesting one.